Hi, this is Jim Ledoux, and we're talking about session 3 of our Thriving Congregations training event, and where we talk about going deeper with systems. And systems are those elements that allow you to deliver your dreams. So we can have a great plan and can create a nice roadmap of what's going to happen, but without adequate systems, systems for financing, communicating, uh, sharing the ministry, all those things will be a hindrance for us living into our plan if we don't create the necessary systems that will lead to success. So, and here, I would just, the goal of this conversation is simply to give you some ideas on where you could go deeper with this idea of systems. So first of all, I want to encourage you to think about what do you do for orienting staff or lay leaders about your core, the course of your organization, your vision, your mission, your values, about your culture. Um, and I remember working with a church that did not do the orientation process well, with this understanding that onboarding is always something that you're doing, not just new members, not just new leaders, but what are all the different venues you can use to reinforce those things that really matter. But they were a church that was, I would say, probably one of the key churches. We call them kind of a model church about the many ways they were helping households practice faith in their daily lives. And just did stellar work. You'd hear the worship service and you'd hear some ideas, and they're really good about celebrating successes where things were showing up. But one of the things we noticed is it started trailing off a little bit different. And what changed is they had a couple changes in both paid and unpaid leaders. But in particular, the leaders that left were the ones that were kind of responsible for onboarding new people. What we found is they started hiring leaders without really sharing the story, the DNA of their congregation. And they'd have new leaders, and we'd come in and we'd have conversations with them. And it was just clear that, the household element of faith formation was not as important. And yet, so often it was relevant elsewhere. But what happened is that we onboarded new leaders and new paid staff members, but really didn't have the script to say what's really, really important. We got to make sure we don't drop the ball on this. We can't lose sight of this. And they did that because the onboarding process in the past is what continuously reinforced that. And they lost that when a couple key leaders were no longer in those roles. So they had to kind of reinvent that, and they were willing to, and they did about 180-degree shift after we noticed that this was happening. So you're right. We no longer did that when that person left. When we actually didn't do, our orientations were very brief and they weren't clear, and you're right, we paid a price for that. So think about how you're orienting people, but also that orienting is something that should happen all the time. Yeah, every time just as I mentioned with a Presbyterian pastor, where their call to worship with naming the mission of the church. That's really important. There was a church in Katy, Texas, that their tagline was, "We're the perfect church for imperfect people." They use that a lot. Sometimes they even, at a time, I haven't called recently, but I know that's how they answered their phone. "Hello, welcome to We're the perfect church for imperfect people. How can we help you today?" That type of element. So they kept reinforcing those key messages. But I think we have to look at that onboarding process shows up at our leadership team meetings. It shows up on our website. It shows up in our social media. It shows up in our individual leaders. And so where we fail, again, this element that culture is something that should be embedded in the entire organization. And these messages then have to be embedded in the entire organization through all the different platforms, through all the different people. But people need to know what the script is and how they can contribute to sharing that script. So I just want you to think about this. So there's a communication element to make sure that we're focusing on the right things, talking about the right things, celebrating the right things. And then also for a lot of churches, they know that to live into this, they need to become a storytelling church. And you need scripts, just like you need a script or a plan or systems for planning worship and evaluating worship and planning farther enough ahead and making sure all the pieces come together. We need to have a plan for capturing people's stories, who's going to do the videotaping, where are these stories going to be shared, how will they be repurposed for other platforms. So there needs to be systems for those type of things. There needs to be systems for how we run our meetings so that we build community, we stay focused on the things that matter, people leave with action steps, people leave feeling spiritually grounded, and leave with maybe learning some new things. But meetings are a system that need to be thought out. When people gather for that 60 to 90 minutes, how do we make sure that it was truly a powerful, impactful, transformational experience for them? How do we create meetings that are wow experiences? It's through systems and norms and intentional design of that time together that makes it powerful. So leaders really need to be designers, not just culture creators. We actually, through our habits and through our designs, and how we frame conversations, how we design our time together, that's what actually creates the culture. But knowing that if we can focus on the systems like that, so we have the onboarding of new leaders, and also think about the systems that you need for moving an individual from a guest or a visitor to a first-time individual to your faith community, to a more frequent visitor, to a person that's really friends of your community, to now wants to be ministry partners, that maybe even wants to now be part of the leadership team of this important ministry. So there's some consistent steps that need to take place to move a person from a stranger to a friend, and to move a person that's embracing the mission to also understanding that they are called to specific roles to serve God in that arena. So I want you to think about what are those systems. Lastly, I just want to lift up the importance of the systems of evaluation. We talk about this innovation cycle where we start with, first of all, we need to be clear about where we want to go. Then we need to listen and discern, is this the right path? And think about how we're going to get there. So then there's some designing of that experiment, how we're going to move forward. Then it's actually living into that experiment or that design or plan. And then we need, along the way, take time to inspect or evaluate our results. And then based on what we learn, we rethink and reimagine what our next steps might be and what course corrections are needed. And then we do another experiment with this new information. And then we start the cycle all over again of asking and reflecting and inspecting, experimenting, and then again, reflecting. So this ongoing cycle of reinvention is what's needed for a church to thrive. But systems matter. Rarely do churches become thriving congregations just because they have a clear and compelling vision and they have some steps. They need a system behind it that allows them to live into that preferred future.